Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Normally we take Sundays off, but there has been so much to cover from this week that we had to do this extra episode so that we can move into a new week of updates from tomorrow. Let's jump in. First up, in the United States on Friday, a group of House Republicans introduced legislation seeking to prevent PRC nationals from studying in the United States, citing national security concerns. The bill, spearheaded by Representative Riley Moore and co-sponsored by 5 other Republicans, aims to bar PRC students from obtaining visas for study or exchange programs in the United States. Moore justified the measure by accusing the Chinese Communist Party of using student visas as a means of conducting espionage and intellectual property theft. Quote, "It's time that we turn off the tap and immediately ban all student visas going to Chinese nationals," end quote, he said. However, the bill faces an uphill battle in Congress and has already drawn criticism from educators, scholars, and advisory groups. Banta Au, Executive Director and CEO of NAFSA, an Association of International Educators, denounced the proposal, arguing that policies should not target individuals based on nationality, expressing, quote, "Making international students, the most vetted and tracked non-immigrants in the United States, a scapegoat for xenophobic and anti-Chinese sentiment is misguided and antithetical to our national interest," end quote. The PRC embassy in Washington condemned the bill, emphasizing that education exchanges have historically been a cornerstone of China-US relations. Additionally, the Asian American Scholars Forum warned that such a policy would weaken US's global leadership in science and innovation. Despite the low likelihood of passage, some experts view the proposal as part of a broader effort to restrict research collaborations between US and Chinese institutions. The number of Chinese students in the United States has already been declining, with India surpassing China as the top source of international students in 2023. And of course, the number of US students studying in China is tiny, numbering only in the hundreds, versus the more than 277,000 Chinese students who were studying at US universities in the 2023-2024 school year. As tensions between the United States and China persist, the future of academic exchanges remains uncertain. Next up, we move to the Chinese economy. Friday also saw the publication of total social financing, this is total debt, in the Chinese system. China issued 6.14 trillion yuan, $855 billion in new yuan-denominated loans in the first 2 months of 2025, reflecting a, quote, "stable and supportive monetary policy," end quote, according to the People's Bank of China, China's central bank. By the end of February, outstanding yuan loans stood at 261.78 trillion yuan, marking a 7.3% year-on-year increase. China's money supply, M2, expanded by 7%, reaching 320 trillion yuan, while yuan-denominated deposits surged by 8.74 trillion yuan, driven mostly by household savings. Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis, in a statement published yesterday, unpacked the implications of all this, expressing, quote, "Debt is still rising quickly in China. In February, total social financing grew a less than expected but still large 2.23 trillion RMB. The outstanding amount at the end of the month was 417.29 trillion yuan, $57 trillion, or 309% of last year's GDP versus 303% at the end of 2024. While it is worth noting that in China, debt always grows most quickly at the beginning of the year, with nearly 1/4 of annual growth in outstanding debt occurring in the first 2 months, this is still a big increase. The outstanding amount of total social financing at the end of February was 8.4% higher than a year ago, for example, versus 4.2% nominal GDP growth. In an economy in which most debt goes to fund investment, debt wouldn't rise faster than GDP if the investment were productive. That is why the increase in the country's debt burden can be seen as a proxy for the quality of growth, i.e., how much of the growth comes from misallocated investment versus how much from productive sources of growth. For example, few, if any, economists expect net exports to contribute nearly as much to growth as it did in 2024, an astonishing 30% of total GDP growth. This means that unless we see much stronger consumption, which accounted for a very disappointing 44.5% of GDP growth in 2024, China will achieve its 2025 GDP growth target of 5% only, with a faster increase in investment than last year. Given that investment almost certainly has a multiplier well below 1, this will require a substantial worsening of China's debt burden in 2025. As long as China maintains these excessively high GDP growth targets, in other words, the only way to slow the growth in the debt burden is if consumption, which is likely to have a very high multiplier, can contribute much more to GDP growth than it has in the past. For it to be meaningful, however, consumption should comprise at least 70% of growth every year, and preferably closer to 90%. For now, that seems hopelessly optimistic, which means either Beijing accepts much lower GDP growth targets, or it continues to see soaring debt. End quote. This is largely consistent with what we have been observing on China Update year to date. Next up, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to like and hit subscribe if you haven't already to be on top of the most up-to-date China analysis as it's released. Next up, at the recent two sessions, China's top diplomat and foreign minister Wang Yi gave a long press conference. In total, he took 23 questions, and his comments provide a useful window into how Beijing views its role in the world, as well as Beijing's policy-making and decision-making elite's worldview of diplomacy and geopolitics. I wanted to end today's video by quoting some of Wang Yi's comments so that we can get a look through this window. We quote this not because we necessarily agree or disagree with the comments, but in order to take note of this elite worldview in Beijing. Question, quote, "You said that China's diplomacy brought much needed stability to a turbulent world in 2024. As more transformation and chaos are expected in 2025, what role will China play in the world on the diplomatic front?" End quote. That was from state-run CCTV, Wang Yi's answer. Quote, "We are living in a changing and turbulent world where certainty is becoming a scarce resource. The choices made by countries, especially major countries, will determine the trajectory of our times and shape the future of the world. China's diplomacy will stand firm on the right side of history and on the side of human progress. We will provide certainty to this uncertain world. We will be a staunch force defending our national interests. The Chinese people have a glorious tradition of relentlessly seeking self-renewal. We never provoke, and we are not intimidated by provocations. No maximum pressure, threat, or blackmail can undermine the unity of 1.4 billion Chinese people or stop our historic strides toward the great rejuvenation of the Chinese race. We will be a just and righteous force of world peace and stability. We will continue to expand our global partnerships, featuring equality, openness, and cooperation. Actively use the Chinese approach to resolving hotspot issues, and write a new chapter of the Global South seeking strength through unity. We will prove with facts that the path of peaceful development is bright and can ensure stable and sustainable progress, and that it should be the choice of all countries. We will be a progressive force for international fairness and justice. We will uphold true multinationalism and bear in mind the future of humanity and the well-being of the people. We will provide global governance that is based on extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefit. We will observe the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and build more consensus for an equal and orderly multipolar world. We will be a constructive force for common development in the world. We will continue to expand high standard opening up and share the vast opportunities of Chinese modernization with all countries. We will safeguard the multilateral free trade system, foster an open, inclusive, and non-discriminatory environment for international cooperation, and advance a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of some of these developments, including your thoughts on these comments by Wang Yi in part 3 of today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you're having a restful weekend. Thank you again for watching today's episode of China Update, and I will see you tomorrow for a new week of updates.